Hello, year 7. We are here with our first video on our YouTube channel for our unit on who rules. So, as recapping our last lesson, which talked about civil war between Stephen and Matilda, we're just going to review real quick. Just some of the major parts of that story and that part of history before we move on to talk about our Who Rules unit. So I want you to look at these questions, and I want you to think if you can answer them on your own, just in review. You can write them down. You can think of it off the top of your head based on our last lesson. So the first question, which two people claimed the English throne in 1135? So which two people both had claims to the English throne in 1135? What year did the Civil War begin between Stephen and Matilda? Three out of the two contenders, who was the real heir to Henry I's throne? Number 4, who won the Civil War? And number 5, what was the name of Matilda's eldest son who became the king in 1154? So try and answer those on your own, and we'll come back and review it. Okay, so for number 1, which two people both claimed the English throne in 1135? That is Stephen and Matilda. Okay, they both had, in their belief, a rightful claim to Henry I's throne. So in their controversy, it began a civil war. Number 2, the year was 1135 that the civil war began between Stephen and Matilda. So number 3, out of the two contenders, who was the heir to Henry I? So Matilda was Henry I's daughter. And Matilda was said that her father had given her the throne of England. However, her cousin, Stephen, said that his uncle, which is Henry I, had promised him the throne on his deathbed. So with this controversy, with both these people claiming the throne, it began a long war between the two groups to try and gain the throne of England. Okay, it became a long civil war that lasted almost 20 years between the two groups to try and vie for the throne of England. So number 4, who won the Civil War? Technically, Stephen won the Civil War. Okay, he defeated Matilda and her oldest son. However, Stephen dies relatively soon after he now takes over and after he wins the Civil War. And number 5, this name of Matilda's eldest son was Henry II. And Henry II becomes the King of England. And that is what's going to lead us into our story and our lesson for today. So our lesson for today is going to be about the reign of King Henry II and how he incorporated the idea of religion and splitting religion, and the relationship between religion and the throne is where our lesson is going to go today. So we're going to talk about today, why was the Archbishop of Canterbury murdered? Okay, so they're going to get into that story, and we're going to get into all this relationship between the Archbishop of Canterbury and the King of England during this time. So first of all, our key terms for today are the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the senior bishop for the church in England. So for the Catholic Church in England, there's archbishops, and the Archbishop of Canterbury represents the Catholic Church in England. And they have their own kind of religious rule and religious duties that they do alongside the king. So next we have Chancellor. So Chancellor is an important position in England after the king. So the second most important position that a king could give to somebody other than being king is a chancellor. And it's basically they're in charge of giving out the royal letters and royal proclamations to the people. Another term is excommunicated. Excommunicated is when someone has been kicked out of the Catholic Church or Christian church. When somebody is removed and they can no longer be in that faith, they are known as excommunicated. And lastly is a martyr. A martyr is someone who is killed for their religious beliefs. So this is all going to lead into our lesson for today. So first we have to understand that in medieval times, right, there was two distinct separate powers that were running the country in a sense. You have the church, who involved in England, which is at this time very religious, and it's a very huge part of English life. And you have the state, which is the king. So both were very wealthy and both were very, very powerful, and they both had two distinct responsibilities. So let's look at these responsibilities. So the king, his job or her job is to run the country. Okay? They have rights to make laws, tax people, start wars, put criminals in jail, choose who is going to be their officials who are going to work for them. And they have the right to use physical force like an army to get their own way. So the king is in charge of the whole country and runs the country and makes sure the country can do what he or she says it can do. However, there's another group, which is the church, the Catholic Church in England at this time. They have their own kind of powers and responsibilities separate from the king. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, like I said, who is the head of the church, of the Catholic Church in England, his role is to run the church and all of the church lands. Now, here's what the similarities are, but they're kind of different. So the church, the Archbishop of Canterbury has the right to get in trouble any criminals that commit crimes on church lands. They have any right to enforce the laws of religion, so like marriage. They have the right to take money or taxes from the church land. They get to decide if a war is good and just or not. And they choose who works in the church and who gets the well-paying jobs in the church. Now, the power of the archbishop is that they can basically say who is or is not in the Catholic religion. So they can use excommunication to get their own way. They can say, well, if you don't do this, then we will kick you out of the church. So what is unique about this is that the king does not really have complete control at this time of England. The king, King Henry II, has to split and share a little bit of his power with the Archbishop of Canterbury because the Archbishop does not have to follow all of the king's rules. We're going to get into that. But I want you to think of what problems could this lead to. So just think about this question, kind of just what I said. There's this separation. There's two people that are running two parts of English society. What problems could this lead to? I want you to think about that as we go on. So now we come to the story. The story where it is that King Henry II, right, he became King of England, and he had a best friend. His best friend is Thomas Becket. Okay, he trusted Thomas Becket, so he made Thomas Becket his chancellor. Remember, we said chancellor is the most important person other than the king. So he gives his best friend all of these high responsibilities and duties, and it's a very important job. But there was a problem with the church that King Henry II had. The church was separate from the king. So if you committed a crime on the church property, you did not go to trial, or you did not have to meet the responsibility of being dealt with by the king. You went and had to be dealt with by the church that you committed the crime on. So people who work for the church, okay, they often broke laws, but the laws that they broke were the church laws, and they weren't the king's laws. So Henry was worried that there was too much crime happening and that the churches were too soft on the criminals who were committing crimes on church lands. So the church usually did not punish people as severely as the king did. So that's what Henry is upset about. If somebody commits a crime on church lands, they do not meet the same strict punishment as the same if they committed a crime outside of church lands on the king's land. So Henry wanted to have a trusted friend that he would put in charge of the church, and basically he could tell his friend and who worked for the church what to do and how they basically would be under the same type of rules. So Henry had to find a way he can get somebody who he trusts and who he wants and who he gets along with on the inside and to work within the church. And there's no other better person that he could ask than his best friend, Thomas Becket. So Thomas Becket becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury. But the problem is that Thomas Becket now took his new job very, very seriously, and being religious became a huge part of Thomas Becket's life. Thomas Becket usually prayed and worshiped God and was involved in the church for hours and hours of the day, during the day. And when King Henry went to go speak to his very, very close friend about changing the rules of the church and the state and the church and the king, Thomas Becket refused. So this made Henry extremely upset because he thought, I have my best friend in the church now and I can rule all of England the way I want to. But these arguments and these debates and this relationship became so bad and nasty that Thomas Becket even had to flee and run away and hide in France for 6 years because he was fearful of what King Henry might do to him. So Becket leaves, runs away to France for 6 years. And while Thomas Becket is gone, King Henry kind of has a little bit of control for a little bit of time, right, over the church. But eventually Thomas Becket returns to England, and what he does is he excommunicates, he kicks out all of the bishops who had helped out Henry and had helped Henry run the church while he was gone for 6 years. So he sacked all of the bishops that were helping out Henry in his absence. And when Henry found this out, that all of his bishops that he had appointed to help him run the church as well as the kingdom, he was mad. He was upset. So he, in his court, in his castle, he said one day, "Is there anyone that will rid me of this troublesome priest?" He said that out loud. So there's 4 knights that heard what the king said, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. They decided to do something about it. So they all set off, they all ride to Canterbury to where Thomas Becket is. So what I want you to do for this task right now, after reading through the story, right, so far of Thomas Becket, I want you to put all of these statements in the correct chronological order. That means what happened first all the way to what happened last. Okay, so put a number. You can put a number between 1 through 6. Tell me what happened first all the way to what happened last so far in our story. And once you've done that, I want you to write and explain what was Henry's plan when he made Becket the Archbishop of Canterbury. What was his reason for doing that? Think about why he named him the Archbishop. What went wrong with his plan? Why didn't his plan work out the way he wanted it to? So work on those tasks. When you finish those, then you can continue with our lesson and come back to this video. So remember those knights, they rode off to Canterbury because they heard what the hopes and the wish of the king. The king did not tell them to go, but they decided to do it for themselves. So those 4 knights arrived at the Canterbury Cathedral. The knights attacked Thomas Becket and they killed him. They attacked him and murdered him with swords, and they killed him, and they cut a portion of his head off. And when people found out about this, people in England were absolutely shocked and appalled. So what I want you to think about is, how do you think Henry II reacted to this? How do you think he reacted to this? This is his best friend, who he may have disagreed with, but he finds out that Thomas Becket has been murdered by these knights. Okay? So how did Henry react? Henry was horrified. He hadn't ordered the knights to go and kill Thomas Becket. He never wanted them to do that. Yes, he might have said a sentence out loud when he was frustrated, but he never told the knights to go do that. So to show that he was sorry, the king walked the streets barefoot all the way to the cathedral, and then he went and he prayed and he sobbed and cried in front of Thomas Becket's tomb while monks whipped his bare back for a day or two. So he also sought forgiveness from the Pope. The Pope forgave him. And as punishment, the 4 knights were sent to go fight in the Crusades. None of them returned. None of them survived. And also because of this, by 1173, Thomas Becket was made a saint by the Pope. He was a martyr. He was someone that was considered holy because he died for being religious. Those knights murdered him, and the Pope and the Catholic Church took that as he died for being religious. So that is the story of King Henry II and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, and how there was conflict between the king and the church, and how there was a continuous conflict and a separation of power. So what I want you to do is you're going to create a front page newspaper article about the events of Thomas Becket's death. So there is a document, if you go on to the student share folder, there is a document that has this whole template that you see on your screen. It has this whole template on there. So if you go and you find that Word document with the template, you can just type everything right in. And I want you to make sure that you include this information in the article. Why was Thomas Becket murdered? How was he murdered? Right, and you can use some of the quotes from the textbook pages. There's textbook pages also in the folder, the student share folder. And I want you to tell me, how did Henry II react? So you want to come up with a name for your newspaper, a headline that's going to catch people's attention, write about the article. You can draw a picture. You can find a picture offline. You write more about the article. Make sure you answer those 3 bullets. And once you're done with that, if you have more time, I want you to answer the super hot and the hot challenges. Hopefully this video was very, very helpful to you in completing this lesson. And hopefully you understand more about the conflict between the king and the church. And have a great day.